Hello, everyone. The whole story is about gross margins. That's really been the drag on Tesla stock. I'd say $30 to $40 of a headwind to the stock you saw in gross margins. This is a huge surprise. Not even we thought we could see a gross margin. This shows price gains of around $2 to $300. Cuts now under control margins start to tick back up. You start to get now toward 20% gross margins. I think this is the start of the stock. Ultimately, this will have a 3 in front of it as a stock as the gross margins start to trend up. And as well as growth into next year from a delivery perspective, look, I think longer term, I would think that the longer term story here is autonomous, is robotics, is essentially the AI play street. What they needed to see here, show me margins. You cannot have margins going toward 13-14%. Now that margin are starting to level off, that is so important, not just from a cash flow perspective, but showing the verses in the rearview mirror. And when you think about all the bears and all the negatives, it comes down to deliveries will start to uptick. China, I think, is a source of strength in the quarter. But that gross margin, it's a Goldilocks for any bear, okay? It's a Goldilocks for any bull. The bears, it's kind of a nightmare because that was ultimately the core of the story. The linchpin to the story from a growth is a sub-30K vehicle. And I believe that hits by middle of 2025. That's the growth in the end. You're talking about single-digit growth this year. That's how you get to 10 to 12% growth margins that are under control. That's what the bulls want to see. And I think it shows that they'll be focusing on more than just margins on the conference call. Robots today, we could argue that many people are disappointed. But I think that in the end, those who chose the vision of the autonomous vision street needed to see stop talking to walk, and they did. Musk really stepped up in that role, and when it comes to Tesla's impressive growth, it's not just about watching from the sidelines for Tesla bulls and people who are always on the lookout for the next stock market gem. Seeking Alpha has everything you need to know about Tesla. Tesla stock price goals. If you click on one of the affiliate links in the description and then buy something, our channel may get a small fee. This is a mix of take a look at GM's quarter. That was a terrible quarter for them, and then compare that to what we've seen with Tesla. I think this is the turning point. I think that this is the beginning of the renaissance of growth come back from a gross margin point of view. They've been in between two growth waves. Next year, they'll have a sub-30K vehicle, and then the autonomous and AI vision plays out. That's how we think you get to the $1 trillion mark cap. And right now, we've seen New York City cab drivers being negative about Tesla. Okay, and I think that's a good setup relative to what we see in next 3-4 quarters. It's a dream scenario for any Tesla bull. I think this could ultimately add $450 per share at Tesla stock right off the bat. And we can now be talking about trillion and a half mark cap for Tesla. Because first off, from an EV perspective, if Trump gets elected, he'll pull the EV tax credits. But that from a scale and scope perspective is a positive for Tesla, and that's huge here. And I think the other thing is if Trump gets in, he will fast-track autonomous FSD cybercab. Could get pulled forward about a year. This is really for Tesla bull if you wake up to this. It's exactly what you want to see. And of course, Musk will clearly have a big voice in a Trump administration. Oh yeah, I think if you look what's happened in China, I think that would be a top initiative to fast-track FSD autonomous. There's been a lot of regulatory hurdles. And this is something Musk talked about Roblox today. Obviously, the initial sentiment was negative. This is going to be the key because ultimately, I think Tesla is the most undervalued AI name in the market. And you look what's happened here. This is just more and more going to unlock that opportunity for Tesla and Musk. Look, I think it's a strategic bet that Musk made that ultimately could pay dividends for Tesla in a huge way for the coming years. I think $40 to $50 per share, it adds just for beginners, not just because of what could happen from a tax credit perspective. I think leveling you playing field, you take out the Detroit automakers, and then that's really going to give them an advantage from a cost scale and school perspective. Biden, the big thing here, Trump could ultimately fast-track autonomous FSD and our whole view, as we talked about in the show, $1 trillion of valuation just on AI alone. This is going to unlock it. That's a key for Musk. I think there's a comfort in him being in this situation that he could almost be a pseudo sort of, call it 10% politician, 90% CEO, in terms of making sure that the retaliatory or the carve out, I think that's going to be important, the carve out piece from a tariff perspective. And I think one of the reasons that you've seen Nvidia up today, you see Semi, you look at Apple, despite some fears about what we're going to see on tariffs, there's a view maybe with Musk their bar could be a little worse than a bite when it comes to tariffs specifically on AI. And I think that's really right now what's key, not just to it, but to the broader tax. I think there's three things. One is that the EV tax credits get taken away, and I think that even though negative for EV sector, bullish for Tesla because of their scale and scope, bad for Detroit, bad for, of course, bad for GM, bad for, and my view going into this was like that was a potential risk. But I think Mary and the team have kind of pulled back a little, so it's not like they bet at all on EVs. So I think one is going to be that where they get an advantage. The second and probably most important is this autonomous FSD, because if Trump clears the way for it, it will change the whole paradigm. There's some street, but it's federal. And then there's the third part, which is a big overhang here. I think another overhang has been regulatory. And I think another overhang has been like FTC with Cage. In terms of not just for Tesla, but for big tech as well, I think many investors I've talked to see it as a con. In this scenario with Trump taking over, which is bullish for M&A and less regulation. But when it comes to Tesla, it's all about Musk now having a say, which he didn't have either Biden. He'll be what I'll call an AI ambassador. That's basically what he could do from a tech point of view. There's comfort, and I think it's one of the reasons why Apple isn't down, even though some people are worried about retaliation. Musk's bigger role in the White House gives some comfort that he can make sure that this doesn't have unintended effects on the big tech trade for Microsoft and the hyperscalers. And I think that's what's at play here, especially since Musk has a lot more power. Oh no, I mean that this is going to be a battle for years to come. But the big one is on the federal side, especially what's going on in China. If Trump really tries to fast-track autonomous FSD, everything we talked about today will be subject to a rubo tax today instead of 3 to 4 years from now. That's what most of the investors I talked to are most interested in. I think the answer is probably yes, which is why we're starting to look at $1.5 trillion market cap as this all plays out. But do you know who else is optimistic about Tesla? That would be today's sponsor, Seeking Alpha. Seeking Alpha is the best source of news about Tesla on the internet. Click the affiliate link in the description below to get the latest price targets for the company's shares. New ideas and everything Elon Musk. There is a link in the description to a very good deal. Yes, I believe that the scores have been a big part of the story they have been beaten by.